wound down in an orderly way, just like a manufacturing firm could do, or just like United Airlines, as I mentioned a minute ago. Then you wouldn't have the too big to fail problem. And right now, because it's not defined, it can be used for all sorts of cases. It could be political things that come into play. You might want to help this firm and not that firm. You say, oh, this firm's systemic, it's too big to fail, we have to prosecute it. So now we kind of are in a problem. And I think the Dodd bill has that problem. It really does have this bailout mentality built into it because these things are not defined. Hopefully they will be by the time the bill is passed, but I have my doubts.
My name is Susan Bailey, and our government has been telling us that Social Security will be bankrupt probably by 2018, if not sooner. And recently, they have either voted on or going to vote on giving illegals Social Security benefits prior to voting them amnesty. I look at this as a stopgap measure by our representatives to keep Social Security afloat a little while longer. How would you deal with the Social Security problem without involving illegal aliens?
Well, I think Social Security is relative to Medicare and all the other relative to the new health care bill eventually, is relatively easy to fix. For example, if, say, starting with, say, adults that are now 40, you arrange that they will have a somewhat longer retirement age than the current age itself, so have that expand at a more rapid rate. So you're not affecting anybody in retirement or close to retirement, but you're extending the retirement age for people that are basically just young or middle-aged at this point. That will fix the Social Security problem. That's enough, actually. It's slowing down the rate of spending compared to what it is now by just recognizing the fact that generally people are living longer, so you can start the retirement later, but you don't do that to anyone who's near retirement, or certainly who is retired, but you go back to someone who's again, say, 40 years old. That's, I think, the simplest way to think about it. There's other things you can do, like adjust how it's indexed to inflation. It's indexed to a price index which is rising more rapidly than the price index it should be indexed to, so you can adjust the price index. So these are kind of small adjustments that can be taking place now and will fix the problem by the time my granddaughter's retiring.
Well, of course it would help if they quit using it as a general fund and actually left the money in Social Security.
Yeah, well, yeah, absolutely. In fact, eventually the trust fund will be going down and we'll have no choice but to use general revenues. We don't know actually what will happen in that case. It's not happened before. But when the trust fund goes down to zero, then you either stop the payments or use general revenues. My guess is the general revenues will come into play, which is unfortunate. And that's why it's so important to fix that now so that we don't get into that situation. It's not that tough to solve. It's a politically difficult because it's the so-called third rail of politics. President Bush started to try to fix it, and he was skewered by the opposition for even mentioning. He mentioned, if you remember, these personal accounts, which was a way that people could begin to save some of their Social Security contributions for retirements, and people criticized him greatly for that. So he tried to take on the Social Security issue. I think it was a relevant thing to do at the beginning of the second term. It was very important, but he didn't get very far. But again, now I think with the general concerns we see in the country, there's some hope to fix these. We have to fix them. And then get on to the things like Medicaid, Medicare, and Obamacare.
Thank you. Next one would be Bob Witham.
I'm a scientific type by trade, so I'll ask the following question. Given that there is lots of feedback or nonlinearity in these systems, have you looked at them from the standpoint of chaos theory? There is a professor at University of Michigan named Page, I think, he calls it complexity theory, but it's the same thing. And I think it would apply to what you're doing, but, I can't give you an answer. I just raised the question.
I don't think I can give you an answer either.
Next one, Louis. That was a good answer. Louis Bueller.
You mentioned in your talk that there were two periods during which debt as a percentage of GDP rose significantly, the wartime periods. How did we bring debt as a percentage of GDP down following those periods, and are there any lessons that we can draw from those two periods in history about how to do it now?
Well, we brought the deficits down from wartime. That made the debt grow less rapidly. The debt will grow as you borrow more each year. The deficit is how much you have to borrow each year, and as you borrow more each year, the debt grows. So if you can bring down the borrowing, bring down the deficits, pretty simple, then the debt stops growing, and since GDP is growing, the debt to GDP ratio will fall even further, and that's basically what has happened each time. Sometimes, and I think it's important for trying to figure out what we do going forward. Sometimes in our history, we've had to make big adjustments in entitlement programs, and if you look back, there are certain episodes in history where usually the president has taken on responsibility for doing the tough job of reducing the growth of the spending. That's actually, you can go back in history and see that, how that has happened. But, and that's going to happen this time. And I sometimes say, there's President Obama was a Democrat. Well, there was another Democrat who we think of as having created a lot of entitlement programs, and that was FDR. FDR actually also took a whack out of some entitlement programs at the time. And so if you want to think about whether it's possible to do this now, it is possible. So maybe President Obama can back him up with FDR did and take a whack out of this thing.
Professor, I'm going to ask you one question too.
Sure.
And that's, based on what I read, it sounds like the approach of Obama, however, is to raise taxes as a way out. Would you respond to that?
It would work. Let me try to, remember that thing that I told you about my granddaughter, 700% that kept going like this? That's almost entirely due to the growth of spending. If you raise taxes, the chart would look the same. So it's still not that explosive. Unless you raise taxes to 100%, which would kill off the whole United States of America. So the point is, taxes does not do it. It's hard to convey that because people say, oh, taxes have to be part of the solution. We have to both cut spending and increase taxes. No, you don't. It's mainly a spending problem. And that, to get that clear is very important.
Edward Stone.
Hi. The government tends to spend the money that it collects in taxes in ways that the taxpayers would not spend it if it were up to them. Should that be taken as an indication that people in government consider their intellect to be superior in comparison to the intellect of 300 million people acting collectively?
There's certain things that we want government to do, right? We want the government to defend us from our enemies. We want to have safe communities. And I think that's why we have taxes to pay for that service. But there's a lot of things, as I mentioned here, the government's doing, maybe shouldn't be doing. Some of those things are not done very well. But I would say, my son served in Iraq, in the military, in the Marines. And I think that's terrific that we have have a strong military. And sometimes it's a problem that we ask the military to do too much because other parts of government doesn't always work so well. But I'm not sure I completely understood your question, but we need to have government. We need to have defense. We need to have police forces to protect us. So there's lots of reasons for this, but there's a lot of things the government doesn't do well. We should look for other ways.